For today's meditation, we are reading from 1 Samuel chapter 27, verses 1 to chapter 28, verse 2. Then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand." So David arose and went over, he and his 600 men who were with him, to Achish the son of Maok, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Abinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. Then David said to Achish, "If I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given me in one of the country towns, that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you?" So that day Achish gave him Siklag. Therefore Siklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And the number of the days that David lived in the country of Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. Now David and his men went up against and made raids against the Geshurites, the Girsites, and the Amalekites, for they were in the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur, to the land of Egypt. And David would strike the land and would neither leave man or woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and come back to Achish. When Achish asked her, "Where have you made a raid today?" David would say, "Against the Negeb of Judah, or against the Negeb of the Geramites, or against the Negeb of the Kenites." And David would leave neither man or woman alive to bring news to God, thinking lest they should tell about us and say, "So David has done." Such was his custom all the while he lived in the country of the Philistines. And Achish trusted David, thinking, "He has made himself an utter stench to his people Israel. Therefore he shall always be my servant." In those days the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Fear and unbelief are always lurking at the door. When Saul was at his mercy, David had spared his life, telling Abishai, "As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish." He was confident that the Lord's plans would come to pass. However, with the constant and prolonged stress and toil of living as a hunted man, he began to say, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul." This was what David said in his heart. He may have never said it out aloud. He may have never said it to anyone else. He may have never said it to God. But what we say in our hearts is our true attitude. It has a tremendous power to shape our actions. This word of discouragement came from a heart that had forgotten the past deliverances and was tired of trusting God for his continued deliverance. It led David to leave Israel and live among the idol-worshipping Philistines. David was so discouraged that he thought there was nothing better for him in Israel and among God's people. When we let fear of death grip our hearts, our whole thinking gets clouded and we forget about what the Lord had done in the past. Through many circumstances, God had proved in the past that he is his rock and his shield. David himself has written many psalms which speaks about the theme. We read in Psalms 91, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will deliver me from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. And his faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day. not the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. David thought that Saul would give up the chase, but Saul alone could never have driven David to the Philistines. Discouragement and despair are more powerful enemies than Saul. They drove David to do something that Saul could never make him do. This decision to seek asylum with the Philistines came despite his earlier disastrous encounter with Achish. On that occasion, he had been forced to resort to acting like a lunatic to escape from his presence. He should have realized that the Philistines were always likely to be suspicious of him because of his numerous victories over them, beginning with the defeat of their champion Goliath. Yet, he saw nothing better at this point. Offenses will come, said the Lord, but woe to the man through whom they come. Great punishment awaits him. Saul has much to account for in thus pursuing and breaking the spirit of Israel's brightest and best star until he had to leave the land of his birth, the land of promise, and seek refuge with their ancient enemy, the Philistines. This time around, Achish received David and his 600 men and gave him the city of Ziklag to live in. The importance of one's word is obvious here. This book was written after David became the king of Israel. Even then, Achish did not revoke his gift, but Ziklag belongs to the kings of Judah until this day, says the sacred chronicler. Achish might have counted on being able to use the services of David and his men to his advantage. He must have thought that they would even fight Saul alongside him, being his allies and thus willing to combat with his own enemies. This is the danger of aligning ourselves with the enemy. He will try to use us as pawns to destroy the people of God. This is why Paul says in Ephesians 6 that we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army. If we have an issue with another brother, it must be deemed impossible to count him our enemy because of it. The Lord said that he would have war with Amalekite from generation to generation. But God's people are not Amalekites. You need to put on the armor of God in order to fight such a battle. A key piece of that armor is truth. Knowing the truth of God's faithful protection and love would have helped David to remember the number of miraculous escapes God had helped him with when Saul was almost upon him. Then he would not have taken this step. Memory helps us to take our stand on God's truth and in turn to stand in the truth. That allows us to use the shield of faith to stop the fiery darts of the enemy. Knowing God's wisdom, power and love are all at work to do what he has purposed for us despite the forces arrayed against us. This knowledge of faith provides the helmet of God's salvation and prompts us to use the sword of his word to fight against the foe. Let us be vigilant against despair, for it denies the truth of God. Rather, let us put on the full armor of God to fight against our enemy, the devil. Let us be watchful against the weakness of our flesh with prayer, as our Lord commands us to do in times of danger and stress, so that we may still do the will of God in faith. Let us not align ourselves with the enemies of God, but cast ourselves on the mercies of God. Let us live by the truth of who God is, our Father and a friend, who will never leave us nor forsake us. Then we will live in hope and with courage, strong in his mighty power.